So, Nomonde, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Dr. Nick, thank you very much for the invitation, and I look forward to my conversation with you today.
It's great to have you on the show. And before we walk into the future, can you please tell us a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up?
With pleasure. I grew up in Soweto, so I was born and raised in Soweto. I was born at Baragwanath Hospital, and I grew up between my grandparents' house and my parents' house, between Meadowlands Zone 1 and Dobsonville, Missy Park. So I'm a Soweto girl through and through.
Right. And tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
My dream career, really, I thought I'd be a lawyer. I actually did study law, so I actually thought that I would be a lawyer. I don't know if it was so much dream career per se. I think it was just because I always had this principle of justice. And one day when I was in a taxi, going home, so I used to use public transport in high school sometimes. I overheard a conversation of a lady who was actually struggling to get legal assistance and help. It was linked to her children's estate, more or less. And I think when you don't have money, it makes it hard to actually get sound legal advice from people. And someone within the taxi advised her that, she could seek legal aid or go to one of the universities, Wits University. If she goes to the law division, they'd be able to assist her there. And just in overhearing that conversation, in my mind, I felt like I wanted to get into the law profession so that I could help people who don't easily have access to lawyers. That it was really what triggered me wanting to study law.
And tell us, who inspired you in your early days?
It definitely, so I am from a strong line of females in my family. It would definitely be my grandmother and my mother, who to this day are still like figures that inspire me on a daily basis. Very strong women who've never believed that they couldn't achieve or do anything that they set their minds to. So definitely they remain some of my key role models.
Now, you started your career at UCS, I believe,
I did.
and
Yes.
you then went into banking. You worked for some of the big banks, Standard Bank, EBSA, Barclays, and now obviously
Yes.
Bidvest Bank. Can you tell us,
Yes.
looking over your career, are there any turning points?
Sure, financial services has been such a wonderful and interesting career journey and path. I think one of my key turning points, though, was when I worked for what was then called, it was ABSA, but it was Barclays Africa Regional Management, where I actually worked with Dr. Etienne Slabert, who was the CIO for the Africa region. So having had the opportunity to work with CIOs outside of South Africa really, really opened up my mind to how diverse the African continent is. I worked with exceptional colleagues. I had a deep appreciation of the fact that just because one thing works in a specific market, it doesn't mean that it's going to work like that in a different market. And made me appreciate that you have to take into consideration the nuances that exist in different markets and with different clients so that you don't apply a lens of one size fits all. Just because something has worked, let's say in Europe or it's worked in South Africa, you can't take that lens and want to self-impose it in Ghana or self-impose it in Kenya, as an example. You have to be mindful and listen to what your stakeholders say they need in said country, and then work with that. But don't come with your own judgments and views around how things should actually move and operate in your respective ecosystem. I think it really made me appreciate the importance of actually having to have an open mind when it comes to service and how you actually service clients. You can't service them based on your own perception of what's right or wrong. You have to service clients based on what they are telling you they would like from you.
And what would you say is driving you today? What is motivating you? What is energizing you?
Oh, my children. I would, family is very important to me. And as someone who, I didn't, honestly, I didn't think I would have kids. It wasn't like a thing at the forefront of my mind of saying one day I'd want to start a family. But I'm really grateful to God for the privilege of being a mom. I think I wake up every day wanting to create a world that is welcoming for my children, all children, to actually be honest with you. So what inspires me on a day-to-day basis are my beautiful kids, Nkanyezi, my daughter, and my son, Langa Libalele.
Langa Libalele, believe this is a famous name in the history, right?
Is it? Which
Yes,
history?
the Anglo-Zulu War. Anglo-Zulu War,
Oh,
there
is
was an
it? Okay,
episode at Isandlwana.
I must watch that episode. I must
Yes,
actually make time to
yes.
watch that episode.
Okay. Now, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Oh, I feel like we have such a massive vacuum and a dearth of leaders who have empathy. I think for the most part we're chasing shareholder value. There's nothing wrong with that. I think all of us, we're not running nonprofit organizations. You obviously want to create shareholder value and ensure that you have profitable businesses and organizations, specifically in this South Africa that we live in, which is one of the most unequal countries in the world. You want to make sure that obviously we get to a point where we are able to employ a lot of people who are unemployed at this point in time. But I do think that empathy within leadership is such a critical thing because it's not often shown. While there's nothing wrong with pursuing excellence and pursuing results, often, Dr. Nick, what I have seen in my career, and I'm sure a lot of people can attest to this, because you have a lot of individuals who are depressed or who are checked into um, psychiatry hospitals because of how they are treated at work. So depression often stems from ecosystems such as this. We spend a lot of our time with colleagues within work environments, more so sometimes than you do with your own family, as you try and create economic liberation for your respective ecosystems. And I feel that a lot of the time, what tends to happen is in pursuit of excellence and results, we leave a lot of dead bodies behind without consideration of what we are doing to people as we pursue results. And that is a very heartbreaking thing for me personally. Also, someone who has had family members who've been in really, really horrible work environments. I think we need to apply greater empathy and care as we work with people, because people are not machines that you just play with. They're not toys. And I think often if we apply the lens of, if this was me, how would I want to be spoken to? How would I want to be treated? When you lead, I really fundamentally believe in servant leadership. You should be able to serve as much as you lead. Yours is a responsibility to create a space for your teams to thrive more than anything else. I think when you reach certain levels in your leadership journey, like once you become an executive, as an example, people know that you have subject matter knowledge. That's why you get the job that you get. When you're a leader of leaders, yours is to ensure psychological safety for these individuals to be able to thrive because they are leading teams. You must create the space for them to be able to lead effectively. But we lead by example. I'm by no means perfect in by any stretch of the imagination. I'm human, I'm flawed, and I make mistakes a lot. Um, However, it's to be able to learn from those mistakes. And if someone says to you, when you said this thing to me in this meeting, it didn't land well because of X, Y, and Z, the ability to be able to apologize quickly to people when you've actually hurt them is also important as a leader. You can't know everything. So it's an appreciation of the fact that to be excellent at what I do, I must be happy and open to be surrounded by people who are smarter than me, because that's really how we're actually going to be able to build an ecosystem of excellence over time. But at the same time, it's to treat individuals around me in the same manner and way that I would want to be treated by people who I'm working with or who I'm leading, because that's someone's father, that is someone's husband, or that's someone's sister. You don't want to take people's dignity away just because they're in a working environment. And I think that's something that I hold very, very close to me, because I fundamentally believe that we're human, man, and we should try by all means to always try and see the God in each other, because if we did that, we probably would treat each other with a lot more kindness than we do right now.
Thank you. Now, as a leader, as a young leader who's risen through the ranks, and as a leader of teams, what have you learned? What would you say is most important for building future leaders? In other words, what is it we have to do more to develop and enable future leaders?
And this is from my own personal experience and also having made mistakes myself in my journey. It's to, I would say, build people in public. So compliment more than you criticize in public when you're leading people. Not that I'm saying that when we are wrong or individuals are wrong, you shouldn't have that conversation, but do that in private. Like do that in a one-on-one that you actually have with individuals. So people's dignity still remains intact, but then you give the necessary support and encouragement for them to be better in everything that they do on a day-to-day basis. When you navigate building other leaders in that way, it becomes a lot more effective. People are going to fall and they will make mistakes. All of us do. But it's to not hold people's mistakes and failures as an everyday thing where you remind them that this thing happened, it shouldn't have happened. In fact, I believe that failure is a critical part of building excellence. You can't get to excellence without getting to instances where you've had to fail, because then how do you learn resilience? How do you learn how to pick yourself up in instances where all you've ever done, the experience that you have is where you've wanted everything. If you've wanted everything, it's going to be very difficult the day that you lose at something, because you won't know how to pick yourself up. You don't know what it's like to actually be resilient. So I think the advice that I would give, having done this wrong many a times, and because I've learned from that, and I can see that when you apply that lens, you are actually more effective as a leader yourself, and the results that you get from your people are actually far, far greater. They outweigh anything else. When you criticize people publicly all of the time, you actually strip away their dignity in some instances. Not that you can get away from it. Sometimes you actually have to call a thing out in that moment, because ultimately, when you're a leader, you're not ice cream, you're not money. So not everyone is going to like you. You must also be okay with that reality. But at the same time, it's also acknowledging that even if people may not like me, that is okay. I mean, by virtue of you accepting a role as a leader, you must actually own the fact that even if people don't like you, you have to afford them the same respect and dignity, regardless of the fact that they like you or not. Yours is to still advocate for what's right. For everyone who likes you or doesn't like you, it doesn't matter. Yours is to actually do what's right, regardless.
Absolutely. Now, as you mentioned, these are challenging times. As the world is stumbling from one challenge to the next, what is your advice for future leaders in terms of challenges? What are maybe some of the biggest challenges they should expect to encounter in their career? And how should they go about tackling these big challenges?
Sure. Change is inevitable. I think the world is changing exponentially. I mean, if you look at the geopolitics of the world right now, every day we never know like what's shifting in the ecosystem globally. So if ever there was a time where resilience becomes a thing that's ingrained in all of us, I think it would be a time such as such as this one. So our inability to be flexible to changing dynamics on a daily basis will harm you as a leader if you can't be a leader who is actually open-minded. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, you also need to have a thick skin, because criticism will come thick and fast all the time. As people have expectations of how fast you should be moving, you're not moving fast enough, but you're also always, there'll be a tug of war between resources, because you're not always going to be fully resourced to be able to do the things that you want to do. You'll be pulled in different directions all the time, because all key stakeholders may want different things at different points in time. And you are but only one person who has to service many, many people. So the ability to prioritize critical things around what do I do first and what do I do second, and to be able to manage your stakeholders in that way of actually saying, I acknowledge, Dr. Nick, that this is critical for us to do at this point in time. But if we look at the organizational dynamics around what is actually going to help us yield to our strategic ambitions quicker, this is how we need to be prioritizing these things. You need to be able to have spirited conversations and debate your points effectively while being respectful while you do it, because you cannot be an effective leader if you are agreeable with every single thing that everyone says, because then you don't have a stand. You just sway with the wind. Whoever's popular at any point in time, you sway in that direction. When you do that, you can't be trusted, because you then become an individual who doesn't have an opinion, who doesn't have a say in anything. And it also becomes confusing to the people you are leading, because one day we're moving in this direction, the next day we're moving in a different direction. But do what's right at all times. I mean, I can speak for myself, working in a financial services organization. You have a fiduciary responsibility when you take a job as an executive in a business. So your responsibility is not just to be popular around that table. It's about ensuring that the organization that you are serving remains profitable. People can remain in jobs, that you ensure that this South Africa works by being able to create employment where you actually can. Leadership is not a popularity contest. I think people often see people in positions and assume, oh my God, that must be so nice. But it's actually a very lonely journey, if we are actually honest. Because when you take a stand that's not popular to what everyone says you should be taking a stand to, it may not necessarily yield to the results that you want. But above all things, always remain respectful, regardless of who you're talking to within an ecosystem. It could be, like the amazing people who service tea, who clean the spaces in which we work. Without them, you can't function. If someone is not cleaning the bathrooms that we use, it creates a problem in the overall ecosystem. Respect should be given regardless of the positions that people hold, because ultimately we're all human, and we should treat each other with kindness and respect at all times, because you never know also the wars that someone is fighting internally within themselves.
So, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills you would want to factor in and maybe even teach?
I think emotional intelligence would be high up there. It will be high up there. I think obviously you'd want to hire intelligent people. So EQ is something that you'd want in leaders that you have. But I think when you marry that with emotional intelligence, that is where the magic lies, because you then have a leader who you want to follow, who's very strategic in their thinking, who can actually drive for results, who aspires for excellence, who pursues high performance. But at the same time, there's a humanity about them that makes you want to work for them. So you follow them not because they demand it, you do it because you want to, because it's something you see in this individual that just makes you want to help them win in whatever it is that they're actually wanting to do. I do think that emotional intelligence is something that we should be teaching in leadership schools as well, or the
Now,
importance of it, really.
right. Now, as a mentor to many future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
I can. I think, yeah, and it was actually a tough journey. Um, I'm so proud of her. Actually, she works in one of the top four banks now. But a few years ago, she was navigating a problem where she felt like the leadership team she sat in, she had no support from them. Although she was meant to be one of the successes that took over from the executive within that business, but she felt like she was getting opposition from all fronts, where she felt like she was actually being sabotaged in terms of the work that she actually needed to do. And I suppose the exam question we're dealing with at that point in time that she wanted to unpack was, does she leave because the environment was becoming untenable? Or what is it? How does she actually manage an environment like that? And the questions that we worked through, or rather, the scenarios that I said we actually needed to unpack was, one, is it really people who are against you, who are sabotaging you? Or is it just a lack of understanding of what their requirements and needs are, because we haven't spent sufficient time with them to actually understand their respective businesses. Because sometimes what you see, the behaviors that we see around the room, we make assumptions through. So sometimes when you're sitting in a room and people are agreeing with something, but there's no congruence between the body language and what they are saying, you should be able to pick up those cues to know that I probably need to spend one-on-one time with Dr. Nick to understand what that's actually about. And when you are able to have difficult conversations with people, because as a leader, you need to be able to do that, you'll start unpacking what it is that that individual actually requires. And you might find that it's not that it's an enemy of your progress necessarily. There could just be a lack of understanding between the two of you. So she then took the time to actually go and sit with those respective leaders who she initially thought were problematic, to understand what are the challenges that actually exist there and how do I help you solve for those so we can actually have a better working relationship. And it was through doing that and getting a better understanding of what those needs were, she was able then to service their respective businesses better and build a more collaborative relationship with those individuals. After putting in work, I think we worked at this for about 9 months. She was eventually promoted into that role. And what helped then was when you start, leading individuals you were colleagues with before, when you've invested the time in building relationships with them, it doesn't become a thing where people are unhappy when you are promoted into those spaces because they know that they can work and collaborate with you. She's since gone on to do exceptionally well within that business. And I suppose that's one story that I can share. Sometimes, you have to stick out really, really difficult situations, but also try and understand, how am I contributing to this? And how do I then solve for it myself without always pointing fingers outwards, without knowing how I contributed to the situation?
And looking back over your own leadership journey, are there any role models of leadership who you have encountered and maybe worked with who you would recommend future leaders should learn from?
Oh my, so many. I think one of them would be Jane Canny, who was a woman who gave me my first shot at like a management and leadership role. Yo, Jane, I don't know if have you watched The Devil Wears Prada, Nick?
Yes, many
The
years ago.
movie. Okay.
Yeah.
So Meryl Streep, the fabulousness of Meryl Streep. Now that is how fabulous Jane is. Not the
Yeah.
meanness of the character,
Yeah.
but this was a woman who, like when she was just gorgeous, but her brain was the most beautiful thing about her. And it was my first example of female leadership where someone had gravitas and they could just command a room, and she could see potential where you didn't see it and grow that potential and nurture it. And I've since heard so many stories about lives she's transformed and where she's spoken life into you about what an exceptional leader you can be, and then you just become it because she just whispered. It was a fairy godmother who whispered into how exceptional you're going to be. So Jane probably has hundreds of executives that she's built in this country, and she'll forever be someone who I attribute to my own personal life journey, not just leadership journey. And of course, I mean, I'd be remiss without speaking about Nompumelo Nomadisa, who's the Group CEO of Bidvest Group. Mpumi has this exceptional trait of, it feels like she knows everyone in the business, literally, like by name. And her humanity is something to be admired. Like when you meet her, you wouldn't think she is as accomplished as she is, and she is just because of her humility, and how she deals and manages people as well. And the contrast when you see her in a board setting as well, she's phenomenal because her brain is also just beautiful. But it's how she engages with people on a human level, which just makes you feel seen and makes you feel special, which I think is such a phenomenal trait. In fact, there's so many leaders within the Bidvest group who are like that. Even Jill, like who's also part of the group, Exco, exceptional human being. And then of course, so many people to mention. Wilhelm Krecha, who's at APSA, also a man who he leads man with heart, but also excellent tries for hard results. Dr. Etienne Slabert, who I think I mentioned earlier on in this interview, Amanda Dambuza, Hannah Mamula Sadiq. I've had exposure to so many phenomenal leaders who've literally poured into me. But it's more than anything else. Like I think the golden thread with all these people I'm mentioning is the aspect of humanity that comes into their leadership style, where all of them expect excellence, but without necessarily like disregarding humanity as part of that process.
Now, where can our listeners follow you and how can they connect with you?
Okay, well, I'm so terrible at social media, but you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sorry if I'm terrible at it. I have a 3-year-old. It's part of the reason why I'm not as active. But on LinkedIn, I'm Nomonde White-Ndlovu. And where else? I'm not on Twitter, so I'm not active at all on Twitter. On Instagram, also Nomonde White-Ndlovu on Instagram as well.
And last but not least, what is your advice for the millions of learners out there who are looking to finish school, to start a career? What are maybe one or two success principles that they should keep in mind?
The one that I'd give is always stay true to who you are. Authenticity trumps perfection every single day. It's easy to lose yourself in the world because of people's expectations, but you become more successful when you pursue authenticity on a day-to-day basis. The world has enough people who are pretending to be others. The world actually needs you, the true version of who you are.
Thank you. Nomonde, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and reminding us of our shared humanity.
Dr. Nick, thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I really, really once again appreciate the the invitation. It's been an absolute pleasure spending time with you this afternoon.